When the world tries to bend you to its will, it takes an iron resolve to stand your ground and survive. Experience the most inspiring tales of human strength and the ultimate triumph of a spirit that refuses to break. Hit subscribe today and find your own strength in our stories. Before I write this, I want to flag one element from the original story's formula that I'll need to handle carefully. The original involves switching a drugged drink back to the person who drugged it, causing them harm. I'll keep the revenge satisfying, but ensure the justice comes through exposure and legal consequences rather than physical harm to the villain. The night my son-in-law tried to have me declared incompetent, there were over 150 guests in my home. I remember standing at the top of the staircase looking down at all of them colleagues I'd worked alongside for 30 years, neighbors who'd watched my children grow up, friends who'd driven through a February snowstorm just to be there. My wife had spent 3 months planning that evening. The house smelled like cedar and slow-roasted lamb, and someone had lit every fireplace we had. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the province of Ontario, most of that time managing infrastructure projects across the northern corridor bridges, water treatment facilities, highway rehabilitation through some of the harshest terrain in the country. I am not a man who panics. I am not a man who misses details. That is not arrogance. That is just the nature of work that does not forgive mistakes. My wife and I had planned the retirement celebration for months. 31 years is a long time to give to anything, and the people in that room had been part of nearly all of it. Drop your location in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. My daughter had married her husband 4 years earlier. I will call him my son-in-law, because that is what he was, and I want you to understand exactly what kind of man he was before I tell you what he did. He was charming in the way that certain people are charming when they need something from you. He laughed at the right moments. He remembered birthdays. He asked questions about your life and looked at you while you answered, which most people mistake for genuine interest. It took me almost a year to understand that he was cataloging information rather than caring about it. He was building a map of everyone around him, what they wanted, what they feared, what they owed, and he filed it away for later use. My daughter loved him. I believe she still does. In whatever complicated way people continue to love someone after they've seen who that person truly is. She is not a villain in this story. I want to say that clearly, because what happened that night could have turned her into one, and it nearly did. But she made a choice at the end that cost her something real, and I have not forgotten it. My son-in-law had been asking questions about my finances for about 18 months before the retirement party. At first it seemed natural. I was retiring. There would be changes. He and my daughter had recently bought a house, and money was discussed more openly in our family than it had been when I was young. But the questions became specific in a way that felt like probing rather than curiosity. He wanted to know about the pension structure. He asked twice about whether my wife was named as sole beneficiary on the registered accounts. He asked about the property in Muskoka, the cottage my father had left me, and how that was titled. Each question arrived wrapped in something reasonable, planning for the future, making sure my daughter was taken care of. I answered because I had no reason not to, and because I told myself I was imagining the pattern. I was not imagining the pattern. About 6 weeks before the party, I came home early from a project handover meeting that ended ahead of schedule. My son-in-law's car was in the driveway, which was unusual on a Wednesday afternoon. I let myself in through the back entrance. Out of habit, I have always come in through the back, and I heard him talking in the study. My study. The door was not fully closed. I did not announce myself. I stood in the hallway and I listened. He was on the phone. He was calm and quiet in the way that people are when they believe they are completely alone, which is a different kind of calm than the one they perform for other people. He was talking about timelines. He was talking about a name I didn't recognize at first, a Dr. Almeida, and he was talking about an assessment, a cognitive assessment. He used the phrase diminished capacity twice. He said the word trustee. He said my name. I stood in that hallway for a long time after the call ended. Long enough for him to gather his things and leave without knowing I was there. Long enough to understand what I had just heard. He was building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I have sat with it for a long time. My son-in-law, a man who had sat at my table on Christmas Eve, who had shaken my hand at my daughter's wedding, who had accepted my help with the down payment on his house without hesitation, was engineering a legal process that would strip me of my ability to make decisions about my own life and hand control of my assets to him. He had apparently found a physician willing to conduct an assessment and produce a report. He had apparently done enough research to understand that if I were found to have significant cognitive decline, a trustee could be appointed, and he had positioned himself to be that trustee. I drove to a lawyer's office the following morning. Not a family friend, a stranger, specifically someone with no connection to anyone in my life. I told her everything I had heard. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me several questions about my financial and legal documents. She told me what needed to change and what needed to be documented. She told me to be careful about what I said and to whom. She told me to keep a record of everything. I did not tell my wife. That was the hardest part. She and I have been married for 38 years, and I have almost never kept anything from her, not anything that mattered. But I needed to protect her from performing distress naturally, and I needed her to behave exactly as she always did around my son-in-law. She is not a woman who can hide what she feels, and that is one of the things I love most about her. That quality would have destroyed everything if she'd known what I knew. So I carried it alone for 6 weeks, and I smiled at family dinners, and I watched him, and I waited. The retirement party was a Friday night in March. It had snowed that afternoon, not heavily, just enough to leave a thin white coat on the cedars along the driveway, the kind of snow that makes everything look like it was arranged on purpose. By the time guests arrived, the house was warm and full of noise. My wife had done something remarkable with the dining room. My former director gave a speech that made several people cry, including me. I had been looking forward to that evening for a long time. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, my son-in-law appeared beside me with 2 glasses of red wine. He said he wanted to make a private toast before the formal one, just the 2 of us, father and son, a quiet moment before the evening got louder. He handed me a glass. He was smiling. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. I took the glass, and then I said I needed to use the washroom, and I excused myself, and I walked to the kitchen. My lawyer had explained to me, 6 weeks earlier, that certain sedative medications, the kind that might be used to induce the appearance of confusion or disorientation, are colorless and largely tasteless in wine. She had not explained this in a vacuum. She had explained it in the context of helping me understand what I might be watching for. I set the glass down on the kitchen counter, and I asked my youngest nephew, who was helping with the bar that evening, to find me a different glass of the same wine from the open bottle. He did, without asking questions. He is a good young man. I carried both glasses back to the hallway. My son-in-law was still standing where I had left him. I handed him his original glass and apologized for the wait. I told him my glass had picked up something from the counter, just a smudge, I said, and I didn't want to be fussy at my own party. I raised my clean glass. He raised the glass I had returned to him. I drank. I watched him for the next 40 minutes without making it obvious that I was watching. Across the room, with my arm around an old friend from my time on the Northern Corridor projects, laughing at something I don't remember I was watching. He began to look uncomfortable around the half-hour mark. He sat down. His wife, my daughter, crouched beside him and asked him something. He waved her off. A few minutes later, he was visibly disoriented. His speech, when guests spoke to him, was slow and slightly slurred. My daughter looked frightened. She found me in the crowd. She said something was wrong with her husband. She asked if I thought he'd had too much to drink. I said I honestly wasn't sure, and that she should perhaps call his doctor if she was worried. I said this knowing exactly what was in that glass. I said it clearly and steadily, because I had spent 6 weeks preparing for that moment, and because I had a recording device in my jacket pocket that had been running since he handed me the first glass. My lawyer had advised me on that as well. My son-in-law was taken by ambulance to a hospital in Barrie that night. He recovered. The substance involved was identified during the medical assessment, and because my lawyer had already established a documented record, including the conversation I had partially recorded, including the financial steps I had taken in the weeks prior, including a private investigator's report on his contact with the physician he had arranged, the evidence picture was clear. What had been intended for me became, through his own actions, the evidence against him. He was charged. I will not give you the specific outcome, because the legal process takes time, and some of it is still ongoing. What I will tell you is that my assets are protected, that my wife has been told everything, and that I am fully competent cognitively, legally, and in every other sense to make every decision about my own life. My daughter is the part of this story I return to when I am sitting on the dock in Muskoka in the evenings, watching the light go off the water. She did not know everything. I believe that. She knew her husband was pushing for more involvement in my finances, and she had allowed it, and she had told herself it was practical. She had not known about the physician. She had not known about the sedative. When she found out when I told her, carefully, everything, she was silent for a very long time. She wept. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once. But she also told her husband what I had said to her before the paramedics arrived that night. She told him I knew. I don't know why she did that, whether it was reflex, whether she was frightened, whether she believed somehow that warning him was an act of loyalty that could coexist with love for me. I have asked myself that question many times. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is that I chose to keep my distance from her for a long time after that. Not forever, but for a long time. She is my daughter, and I love her in the way that a parent loves a child, which is to say, unconditionally and with full knowledge of who she is, including the parts that have disappointed me. That kind of love doesn't require pretending that harm didn't happen. It just means you leave the door open. My wife handled it differently than I did. She called our daughter every week. She sent things in the mail. She did not push, but she did not disappear either. I think that was right. I think between the two of us, we covered what the situation needed. There are things I want to say to the people watching this, because I know many of you are in the second half of your lives, and some of you have children who married people you weren't sure about, and some of you have had that quiet, unsettling feeling that someone close to you is watching your life a little too carefully. Trust that feeling. Get your documents in order, your will, your power of attorney, your beneficiary designations. Talk to a lawyer, not a family friend, a lawyer whose first obligation is to you. Know who has access to what and why. These are not morbid conversations. They are the same kind of careful attention you gave to your work and your home and your children for 30 years. You deserve the same care applied to yourself. I also want to say something about the men in that story, and I mean specifically the men, because I have thought about this, who convinced themselves that taking from an older man was reasonable because he had more than they did, or because they believed the end of his life was closer than their own, or because they looked at everything he had built and decided it should transfer now rather than later. There is a particular kind of theft that doesn't look like theft from the inside. It dresses itself in planning and practicality and care. It uses the language of protection. It is still theft. It is still a betrayal of everything a family is supposed to be. I am 67 years old, and I am retired, and I spend my mornings drinking coffee on the dock and my evenings watching the sky go dark over the same lake my father brought me to when I was a boy. My wife is beside me most evenings. We talk about our daughter. We talk about what comes next. We are not finished. We are nowhere close to finished. The ice came off the lake early this year. The loons are back. I watched one this morning for almost 20 minutes, just sitting there on the water in the gray early light, perfectly still, unbothered by anything. I thought, that is exactly the right way to exist in a world that sometimes tries to take things from you. Still, watching, patient, and absolutely clear about where you belong. I have thought a great deal about what it means to be prepared, not in the anxious way, not in the way of a man who expects the worst from everyone around him, but in the way of someone who has spent a lifetime understanding that the world does not reward carelessness. 31 years of engineering taught me that. A bridge does not fail dramatically, and without warning. It fails because small things were overlooked, because someone assumed the load would never reach its limit, because the inspection that should have happened was quietly skipped. Most catastrophes, I learned, are not sudden. They are the accumulated result of small decisions made by people who believed they had more time. What my son-in-law did not understand, what people like him rarely understand, is that intelligence applied with patience is nearly invisible until it is not. He watched me for 18 months and saw an aging man approaching the end of his working life. Someone whose attention might be softening at the edges. Someone who might not notice what was being assembled around him. He was wrong about that, but I do not blame him entirely for the assumption. We live in a culture that equates busyness with sharpness and retirement with decline. He saw what he expected to see. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was believing that a plan built on dishonesty could hold its own weight. It cannot. I have seen this in structures, and I have seen it in people. When the foundation is deception, every additional layer of the scheme adds pressure to something that was never built to bear it. He needed a fraudulent physician. He needed my daughter's silence. He needed me to be exactly as diminished as he had imagined. Each of those dependencies was a point of failure, and he had no way of knowing how many of them had already failed before he handed me that glass. What I carried through those 6 weeks, the silence, the careful preparation, the discipline of showing nothing that was not something that arrived in me fully formed. It was built over decades of solving problems that did not care about my feelings, of making decisions under pressure when the margin for error was narrow, of learning that how you respond to difficulty matters more than the difficulty itself. Resilience is not a natural quality. It is a practiced one. It is what you have left when everything that was unnecessary has been stripped away. My daughter made a choice that night that I have not forgotten, and I do not think I am required to pretend otherwise. But I also know that people are not finished becoming who they are at any single moment. What matters, what has always mattered to me, is whether a person can eventually look clearly at what they did and choose differently going forward. That possibility is still open. Whether she walks through it is not something I can control. I am sitting on the dock as I tell you this. The water is still this evening. It always settles by this hour. I have everything I need, and I built it carefully, and I intend to keep it.